All right, so this is the video for the WIN work. It's going to come out of the NC Ready book. It's page 114 that we need to be on. We need to have our markers out or our highlighters, whichever it is that you use for when we're answering the questions. And normally we would read this together, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it out loud because there's some things that I want to talk about as I'm reading it. So just make sure you're paying attention and following along. And what we're focusing on is setting. Specifically, how does one setting compare, contrast to another? So there's going to be two separate settings in this text, and they're going to be different, and we need to be able to talk about how they're different. Okay. The snow squeaked beneath their boots as the three boys tramped toward Sherburne's Hill, their favorite coasting hill in all of Boston. The streets were quiet that snowy January morning in 1775, with only a tight group of British soldiers marching boldly past the silent houses. The boys ignored the soldiers, being used to them. A few thousand British troops were now in Boston, hoping to crush the colonists' growing rebellion against the king and his laws. So in those first two paragraphs, I already have a very good idea of where the story is taking place. I know that it's occurring in the morning. It's January. It's snowy. It's 1775. They're in Boston, Massachusetts, which is in modern-day United States. They're by a hill called Sherburne's Hill, and the houses are silent, which probably tells me it's very, very early in the morning, and people are probably not up yet. There's soldiers, so there's like this intimidating feeling, an intimidating mood on the streets, but the people are used to them, so maybe not as intimidating as it had been at one point. So that's our setting for the beginning of the story. All right, let me pick up with paragraph 3. "Hurry, Sam," called Edward. "You're making us late again." Sam struggled to keep up with his brother and their friend Joshua, but his stiff right leg slowed him down. Every step reminded Sam of that awful day last spring when a British officer had come to his father's blacksmith shop. Sam was proud to hold the horse's leg for his father, but then the horse had kicked hard, a bone in Sam's leg cracked, and the break hadn't healed properly. So Sam has trouble walking and keeping up with others because he has a leg injury. Now Sam's cheeks turned red when Joshua said, "I thought we were going to get there early today, before General Haldimand's servant came out." Sam protested. "It's not my fault the servant sprinkles ashes on our coasting hill when he cleans the general's fireplace." All right, and so there's a picture of the boys. They're hauling a sled. That's what they mean by coasting. They want to sled down the hill. All right, flipping over to paragraph 7. Joshua looked up and groaned. "Oh no, late again." A man was standing in the middle of Sherburne's Hill, trampling the snow and scattering ashes. "Well, that's it," said Edward, kicking the sled. "If we'd gotten here sooner, we could have had a few good runs before he ruined our hill." "Sure could have," said Joshua, looking at Sam. "Next time he stays home." Sam jammed his icy fingers into his pockets and lifted his chin. "I may be slow," he finally said, "but I'm not afraid of the redcoats. I'll get the servant to stop." The two older boys hooted with laughter. "You?" said Joshua. "What can you do?" Sam hesitated. What could he do? Then he looked at the servant again and said, "I'll tell him to scatter the ashes someplace else." He started to limp up the hill, Edward and Joshua following. The cold wind bit into Sam's cheeks, but he kept going until he reached the servant. Can wind bite? All right. "Please, sir," Sam said, I'd like to make a request." Sam wanted to run, but he had come too far. "Could you scatter the ashes someplace else? They ruined the snow, and we can't coast." The servant laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "It is not for a colonist's children to tell the British Army what to do. Now run along before I—" Sam didn't hear the rest as Edward grabbed his arm and pulled him away. "Come on," he said. So this servant, obviously he's not a very high-ranking person in the military if he's a servant. Like, he's not a general or some troop in the field. He is a servant. His job is to take care of other military people. But his attitude is very much like he is important, right? Like he's someone of status because he's talking so down to these boys. He's saying it's not for colonist children to tell the British Army what to do. So he feels like because they are children of his enemy, because he's a redcoat, a British military person, that he doesn't have to even listen to them or entertain anything they say. All right, so think about also what was the setting like here on Sherburne Hill when he was interacting with the servant. Think about the location and the weather, the temperature. Obviously, we're still in Boston, Massachusetts. It's still 1775. That hasn't changed. It's still January. But the exact location is a little bit specific, and we'll need that information later. Sam followed Edward and Joshua. How he despised that servant. Coasting was the one time his bad leg didn't matter. "Stop!" Sam called suddenly. "I'm going to see General Haldimand myself." "Then you're going alone," said Joshua. "He'll never listen to us." Edward looked at Joshua. "We'd better stay with Sam," he said. "Ma will blame me if anything happens to him." Sam headed for the general's house. He could feel his heart thump, thump, thump like the steady beat of a drum. He stopped at the heavy wooden door, his knees shaking. But he lifted his hand, made a fist, and pounded as hard as he could. A young soldier opened the door. "Who is it, Private?" a voice boomed from inside. "Let them in and close the door. The wind will blow my fire out." The three boys crowded into the hall to find a big man in a red uniform standing in a doorway. "I'm General Haldimand," the man said. He led them into his office. Flames leaped about in a huge stone fireplace. So think about that setting. Okay, they're in a building now. They're in a house. They're in an office specifically. There's a fire. It's warm. It's so warm that when they opened the door, the general knew that it was open and wanted it closed before a draft could get in there. So this is a very different setting than on the hill. Sam swallowed. "Well, sir," he began. He told the general about the hill and the servant. "We are free citizens of Boston," he said, "and you have no right to destroy our hill." General Haldimand frowned, and Edward tugged at Sam's sleeve. "Let's go," he whispered, but this time Sam stood his ground. For 10 long seconds no one moved. Then the general raised his hands. "You win, my lad," he said, smiling. "There are already bad feelings between our army and the people of Boston. I shall not add to them, and I will give orders that my servant repair the damage and no longer scatter ashes on your hill." Before I continue, that is such a stark contrast with the servant, right? Here we have a general, a very, very important person in the military, someone with status, with power, with importance. And think about his reaction with the boys and how that was different from the servant, who doesn't hold that high position that the general did. So it was a little surprising to see the general be more merciful, more gracious, more kind, not dismissive of the boys like the servant had. I would have expected it to be the opposite, so it was kind of shocking. Back outside, Joshua and Edward whooped and shouted in the falling snow. Edward draped his arm around Sam's shoulder, and Joshua patted Sam on the back. "You can have the first coast tomorrow," he said. Sam's eyes shone. His sled would fly faster than anyone's. The boys tramped home together through the snow, and no one told Sam to hurry up, not once. All right, so let's go to our questions. We're going to need 3 separate colors for these questions. I want you to go ahead and practice what you think is important when you're highlighting these questions. So I want you to read question 1A, highlight what you think are the important words. What are the words we absolutely have to have for this question to make sense, without all the extra fluffy words they like to throw in there to confuse us. All right. Once you have got that highlighted, you can go ahead and read through the answers, go find your answer in the text, highlight it in the same color, and then highlight your answer in the same color. So that question 1A will have the question, the answer, and the evidence all in one color. When you get to part B, I want you to do the same thing, just with a new color. Highlight what's important in the question, highlight your evidence in the text, and highlight your answers, this one you're choosing 2. Then I want you to skip down to question 3, and we're doing the same thing, highlighting the keywords in the question, highlighting the evidence, highlighting our answer. And then for this question here, which is actually question 2, this other one was 1B. Question 2, it wants you to find the word in this paragraph here that has the closest meaning to destroy. So that's what you're going to do there. When you're finished with this, I need you to rip out pages. I need to write this written down. 109 to 118. 109 to 118. Make sure your name is on the first page when you are done with this and you've ripped it out and you put your name on it. Make sure your name's on it so I'm not having to play guessing games as to who it belongs to. And then Miss Hill, if you don't mind, if you could collect those and staple them for me. All right, so I want to see pages 109 through 118. So that means you also rip out 108. That's okay. If it means you also rip out 119, that's okay. I need to see 109 through 118. All right, that should not be something that you rush through. This assignment should take you at least 20 or so minutes to get through if you're really thinking critically about the questions, finding the answers, and highlighting your evidence. All right.